so interesting. We've covered so many things on the science of weight loss. But today's topic was one of those, as we're transitioning to the psychology of weight loss, there was this episode here where we're like, we don't know where to put this. And so I decided just to put it here today.
Yeah. And if you listen to outside of the series, we did a couple of episodes months ago. One of the questions that was asked in that episode was, if there were any kind of recommendations you had for people that were wanting to lose weight, what would be, I guess, the 5. And one of the things that I said was, if there were 2 things that people could start doing now that would just make everything else easier, it would be drinking more water, and getting the right amount of restful sleep. And I don't think people realize how important sleep is, not just for weight loss, but just health in general. And so we'll talk about that a little bit today. Seriously, today we're just going to be scratching the surface. There is so much that can be said about sleep. We're going to focus on just some of the quick ways it relates to weight loss. But it's so deep, this topic. And it's just getting deeper and deeper as more research is being done. So
For sure. Well, and again, I think in our American culture, it is very easy to throw sleep out first, right? Because we have kids, we have work, we have all these projects, and we end up cutting sleep first without realizing that if we don't sleep, it not only does it affect our mood, it affects our memory, it affects our attention, but also from a weight loss standpoint, it affects food choices, it affects energy to exercise. All these things play a role. And unfortunately, sometimes I do think we self-sabotage, especially in this day and age with social media and all the things, we self-sabotage our sleep as well.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned some of the things that it hurts. And so I want to ask you a question. So why do we sleep?
So I'm assuming a couple of things: regeneration of muscles and healing of of tissue. So for example, if you exercise and you need muscles to build and things like that, that needs to happen there. I'm assuming hormone production also happens during that time. Memory, focus, all those things happen. Am I missing? What am I missing?
You're pretty much getting the gist of it. I was genuinely asking you why we sleep. I don't have an answer for that. I kind of have the same answer as you, but it's basically the body's period of time where it just rebuilds everything. Anything that is going on in your head, it tries to make sense of that and file it away in, coherent ways so that if you need to recall it, it knows where it put that. And so memory is affected. So on the opposite side of that, because you do all of that stuff while you sleep, if you disrupt your sleep, you have issues with those things. So like you said, memory, cognition, hormone imbalances, all kinds of stuff. And so do you know off the top of your head how much sleep we should be getting?
I'm going to go with the traditional 7 to 8 hours. Is that?
It's 7 to 9. That's pretty much it though. Yeah, about 8 hours. And do you know how much sleep the average American gets every night?
I'm going to put it around 6.
It's about 6.8. So it's not quite enough. And it's basically 33% or around 1/3 of Americans don't get enough sleep every night.
Okay.
And so I have a few statistics here, and I want to go through those real quick just to kind of, I guess, give us a launching point on what we're up against, I guess. 50 to 70 million Americans have some type of sleep disorder. So there's something going on that is affecting their sleep and kind of setting up their day for, I guess, lower performance or issues, right? 8% of adults use prescription sleep drugs. And 80% of those have some sort of side effects from those medications that kind of impair their cognition or energy levels or whatever, the next day. So it's not that you can just take a sleeping pill and then it not have any residual effects the next day. Like about 80% of people still have some sort of deficit coming out of, sleeping drugs. And then 60% of people that have sleeping problems don't seek help for their sleeping problems. So they just kind of live and go throughout their day, kind of maybe not even knowing how bad they're being affected, but also just not looking to fix it.
Yeah.
Because they just assume that is what it is, you know?
That is actually very, very true. Because a lot of patients, they come in and we ask them about all sorts of things. And usually if they ever complain like, well, I'm really fatigued, and they thought it was my thyroid, it's my testosterone, it's my all the things. But when you ask them, and you ask them, well, how's your sleep? They're like, well, I only sleep 4 or 5 hours a night. And you like, do you think that? And they're like, no, that's not it. I'm like, it's got to be it but on the flip side, you're right. We kind of it's just how it is. We just don't sleep. There's something else going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a statistic I'm going to talk about later, but it is, I don't think people understand how important even 1 hour of sleep. And since we just had daylight savings time, like we can talk about that because we're, playing around with our sleep by an hour. And so I have some pretty eye-opening statistics there.
Yeah.
What 1 hour difference can do.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you if you wanted to take a shot at why are people not sleeping very well? Like, what are the things that people say are the reasons they don't sleep well?
So I'll just say the most common one that I see and I hear, at least now, is almost like the average parent gets the kids to bed. They need some time to themselves. And that time goes from, I'm thinking, oh, you just need about 30 minutes to kind of unwind. It ends up being like 4 hours.
So that's an interesting one because I don't have that on my list because that's not one that's reported in the statistics. But there is that concept is called revenge sleep procrastination, which is something that I have struggled with and sometimes still do. But it's this. You go throughout your day. You get up, you get ready for work, you get your kids ready, you get them to school, you go to work, you work all day. You get off work, you pick up your kids, you put dinner on the table, you get them, you play with them, and then you get them to bed. And finally, you have a minute to do you've been doing for everyone else all day long. And now you have a minute to do for you. And so you do the things that you want to do, which is great.
Right.
But that when you go to sleep, even if this is subconscious, when you go to sleep, you're just going to wake up and then do for everybody else. So you put off going to sleep because you don't want to stop doing the things you want to do. And then you end up being worse off the next day because you end up staying up until 2 a.m.
Right.
Doing nothing, literally doing nothing.
Yeah.
Just doom scrolling on YouTube shorts.
That's so true. Yeah. Well, and again, I think, last week, 2 weeks ago when we talked about like our metabolism, our physiology and, time and what the human body was designed to do. It was designed to go to sleep when the lights went off, right? And when the sun came up, we wake up and we do our chores. But when the light essentially went off, other than candlelight, we had nothing.
Right.
And so now with electricity, not only electricity, fluorescent lighting and 24-hour lighting, that really has disrupted what our physiology was designed to do.
Yeah, it's that blue light that has kind of become the standard, in households, and that blue light disrupts. I think it's melatonin production in the brain, which is important for sleep. So that's why one of the recommendations for getting a good sleep routine down is turning off those lights. Turning on some warmer lights, getting off of your screens because these screens are blue light, and or using a blue light filter or something, because it makes it harder to go to sleep. Aside from the fact that you're just staying up on it.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of go through a summary of things that we can do to kind of help us get to sleep better a little bit later. But yeah, that's a good point. The light definitely makes a difference.
Yeah.
But so I want to run through this list of reasons that people are having poor sleep.
It's like Family Feud.
Yeah.
Top 10.
So 51% of people say that it's physical symptoms like back pain, leg pain, restless leg syndrome. 41% say anxiety about the events of the next day.
Okay.
So they're worrying about what they have to do tomorrow, and it's affecting their ability to fall asleep. 37% say that it's replaying the events from that day.
Oh, wow. So a lot of it mental. Yeah.
So it's like some are worrying about tomorrow and some are worrying about what they just did that day. And so there's a lot of, mental, and the thing is, if you were to go to sleep, your brain would process all of that for you. And hopefully, hopefully you wake up tomorrow and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So, it's a problem. But 28% say too much caffeine. And then 9% blame the pets. So
I can see that. Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what do you think? Who do you think gets blamed the most, the dogs or the cats?
I'm saying dogs.
It was the dogs.
Yeah, see, dogs.
5% to 4%.
Yeah. They always get, because especially a lot of people let the big dogs come in their bed, and they're like another child, right? In your bed, just kicking you nonstop. So you got to protect that time. Keep those dogs out.
So I wanted to swap over and talk about a couple of the most common sleep disorders, because remember we talked about earlier, it's like 50 to 70 million Americans have some type of sleep disorder. Two of the most common ones are insomnia.
Yep.
And then obstructive sleep apnea, which is one of the ones that we'll probably talk a little bit more about today, because there's a lot of overlap between obstructive sleep apnea and obesity. So, hindrances to weight loss and stuff like that. But insomnia is just the condition of having difficulty falling asleep for whatever reason. 30 to 40% of adults in the US complain about insomnia symptoms. And insomnia is very, very highly correlated with depression as well. And so people with depression, 83% of people with insomnia report some type of depression as well. So the problem is that depression leads to poor sleep, and poor sleep also leads into depression.
Right.
So just like with weight loss, where with the body's defense system kicking in and making obesity kind of a self-regulating, like a self-sustaining cycle, depression can be the same way when it comes to sleep. It feeds into itself and just compounds. It makes it worse. So one of the things that we can work on is improving sleep and kind of help get things at least somewhat in a better state to where we can start working on the underlying depression symptoms, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, just all those reasons people can't sleep. They're either worried about what they did today or worried about what's happening tomorrow. And sleep can actually help a lot of that. But if you don't sleep, then those anxieties continue over and over and over.
Yeah. We got to figure out how to break the cycle somewhere.
Yeah.
And then once that cycle is broken, then we can start to address everything.
For sure.
And so obstructive sleep apnea, which is where when you go to sleep, the muscles in your neck relax, the airway closes, and you just kind of stop breathing. Snoring is very highly associated with that. So people that snore really, really loudly, or I've heard people, in my life where they snore and then they just stop.
Yep.
And then, they take this humongous breath, and it wakes everybody up because they're like, are they okay? And it's, that's bad. And so with that, the person suffering from it usually doesn't wake up.
Right.
They usually stay asleep. And then they wake up and they feel like they got no sleep, because there are certain levels of sleep that, you go from like light sleep into deep sleep, and then into REM sleep. And, deep sleep, I think, is more associated with, physical reconditioning, whereas REM sleep is more associated with like dream states and cognitive, memory formation, all that kind of stuff. But if you can't get into, deep sleep regularly or REM sleep regularly, your sleep is just not good quality. So even though you are technically asleep, you are not getting into the levels of sleep that you need to actually see the benefits of it. And so people that have untreated sleep apnea are just chronically fatigued and tired, and have cognitive dysfunction from that. And, and it affects the weight loss as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that is probably one of the biggest issues right now with Americans, is obstructive sleep apnea is all over the place. And it's like you said before, the obesity triggers obstructive sleep apnea, which worsens obesity. So we're in a stuck spot for sure. Yeah.
So 25 to 30% of men and 9 to 17% of women have obstructive sleep apnea.
Wow.
And with that, the rates of obstructive sleep apnea within people who are considered obese with their BMI is about 45%. So it can get up to almost half of people with obesity. And, the higher the BMI goes, the more prone to that you are. But sometimes it's like 45% of people that have obesity have chronic or obstructive sleep apnea as well. And so that's pretty alarming.
Okay.
And so, the primary treatment usually is getting a CPAP. So that pushes the moist air into the airway, keeps it open, and then you can sleep better. But that comes with issues. I have a lot of people that I've talked to that that they can't use it. They just can't sleep with it on. And, so they are kind of stuck.
Yeah.
So another good treatment for that is if it's related to obesity is to lose some weight.
Absolutely.
And you'll see some improvements with it, hopefully.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's why you got to listen to the first 4 episodes, right? And get here.
Here we are, the self-plug.
That's right. Well, and again, I think for most people, it just makes sense, right? So if you get the weight off your neck, then when you lay back to sleep, because again, you can't control if you're a side sleeper or a back sleeper, so people can try to move them around and maneuver things, but if you end up on your back, it closes again, and then we're back to where we are. And so again, the sleep and the weight loss, they are very intricately linked together, and we have to kind of fix both at the same time to see if we can kind of move the needle.
Yeah, and so outside of weight loss, poor sleep has other effects on our health. So like cardiovascular health. So it contributes to hypertension, heart disease, heart attack, high cholesterol, diabetes, and stroke. And it's because sleep deprivation contributes to inflammation, like systemic inflammation. And if that's kind of one of the gateways towards atherosclerosis and that plaque building up in the arteries. So interesting thing. This is where that statistic I was going to tell you with daylight savings time, the difference an hour can make. So in the spring, when we spring forward and we lose an hour of sleep, there is a 21% increase in heart attacks on the Monday following daylight savings time.
What? Really?
And then in the fall, when we gain an hour and we get that extra hour of sleep, there's a 24% decrease in heart attacks the Monday following daylight savings time.
That's interesting.
So when we lose an hour, we end up with 21% more heart attacks. And when we gain the hour, we end up with 24% less, which is crazy because it's just 1 hour.
Yeah. But it makes such a big difference. And I know when I was post-call, and if you miss sleep or you're just like, I'm okay, I'm going to power through it, the next day is horrendous.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And when I was younger, I could power through it. But, the older I get, the more sleep I need, which it's interesting when you look at how much sleep do people need and you look at the age ranges. It's the older you get, the less sleep you need theoretically. But I'm like, I'm not experiencing that.
No, not at all. I see what my dad used to be like, y'all go to bed, we're going to bed. And you're like, whatever, when you're younger. And now you're like, dang, I feel bad.
Like there are nights where I literally finish what I'm doing and I look at the clock, it's like 7:00. And I say, well, I'm just going to go to bed. I don't have anything else to do.
Yeah, that's right.
And I know if I get started with something, I'm probably going to stay up too late. And like these days, I go to sleep early.
Yeah.
For me, super early for me.
For sure.
So immune system gets affected by it too, which, protects us from everything. So if you are chronically sleep deprived, you're probably going to be more prone to getting sick.
Yeah.
And I can vouch for that because there were years there where I was just sick repeatedly and I was not sleeping very much, for different reasons, but yeah, your immune system just gets shot.
Yeah.
And then obesity and diabetes, I'm going to tie together because the mechanisms are kind of intertwined. Because when you get poor sleep, or if you are sleep deprived chronically, especially, it has some hormonal effects. So it disrupts your glucose metabolism. So your blood sugar goes all over the place. And for people with diabetes that have blood sugar issues, especially when they're sleeping, they may get headaches when they're sleeping. They may have to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. So that disrupts their sleep. Any kind of neuropathy that they have from high blood sugar can cause them to have issues with sleep. Yeah. And so it just kind of feeds into it. Plus, if you have issues with your blood sugar or issues with some of the other hormones like leptin and ghrelin, which we've kind of talked about leptin a lot.
Yeah.
Ghrelin is its kind of counterpart. It's the hunger hormone. So poor sleep decreases leptin. And so we know what happens when we decrease leptin. I think we talked about that last time, last episode or 2 episodes ago. When you increase ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, you just get hungrier. And so if there are disruptions in that, you tend to just eat more in general.
Yeah.
And then you have increases in cortisol level, which is associated with stress, but it also, cortisol kind of makes you a little bit more prone to storing fat.
Right.
And so you are signaling your body's self-defense system, which then slows your metabolism down, right? It makes you hungrier. Cortisol makes you more prone to storing fat. And when your body is, the self-defense system is kicking in, you remember one of the effects of that is making you crave higher calorie foods because it's kind of associating that lack of energy with, not eating. So it makes you want to eat foods that are specifically high in calorie, but high in carbohydrate. And that's where the diabetes is disrupted there too, because if you're waking up in the morning and you just have cravings for carbs and you just go out and, eat a dozen donuts, that's not good for your weight or for your blood sugar.
Correct.
And so I put those two things together. But yeah, it's like the obesity leads to, or the obesity or the diabetes can lead to poor sleep, which then again cycles back into itself.
Correct.
So if you're seeing a pattern here of things feeding back into themselves, that's kind of an indicator that the sleep is really important and we need to make it a priority.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think we've hit the nail on the head over and over again that if you don't sleep, it is hard to get a lot of things better, right? And even, I'll just put a plug in here, for a lot of men with low testosterone, fix the sleep. Fix your sleep. You will fix a lot of that on your own. You don't need to have to go and jump for shots all the time.
Yeah, I've had a lot of guys ask me about that, and it's kind of the, you look at the recommendations for what can I do from a lifestyle factor to increase my testosterone naturally, and it's I want to say it's 5 things. It's eating a balanced diet, with enough protein and all that, meeting all those needs, doing some form of exercise with resistance training, drinking plenty of water, managing your stress, and then getting enough sleep. And I'm like, those are the prescriptions, the lifestyle prescriptions for literally everything.
Absolutely.
And the problem is that we're not doing those things. And so we so often, come into the clinic and we're looking for, the solution, thinking that it's the shot, because we're not addressing these things first. So if you're having problems, like address those 5 things.
Absolutely.
Which we're not doing.
Exactly.
And most people would see some, benefit. And if you're doing all 5 of those things and you're still having issues, that's when, we resort to other measures like medications or exogenous hormones and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, again, I think before we were talking even 2 episodes ago, our body is designed to stay alive and reproduce, right? And so if we're not doing any of those things, the body essentially is like, this is not a good time to have a child.
Right.
It's famine, it's war, it's something that's going on, right? And so because of that, if we fix those things, the body usually will naturally be like, okay, let's kind of ramp everything back up because we're in a good environment with lots of nutrients. But if we're not, then you can only expect so much, I guess. Which again, Michael, then I guess pushes us, if we see sleep is so important, is there any strategies we can do? So for the chronic person that I just can't sleep, what do you usually tell them?
Well, I broke it down into 4 different categories of things to address. So we have physical activity and exercise. And so doing your intense or heavy physical activity earlier in the day is better. But the reason that kind of helps is that exercise is associated with improvements in depression and anxiety levels, which, if you remember, it was like in the 30s and 40s% are having trouble falling asleep because of anxiety about tomorrow or, ruminating on the day and they're not able to fall asleep. And so if you can get a good bout of exercise in to help reduce those stress and anxiety and depression levels, that'll just make falling asleep a little bit easier.
Yes.
But you don't want to do that too close to sleep because then you got your heart rate up and it might be a little bit harder. But you could do some meditation or, low intensity yoga or stretching. And that would be appropriate to do before bed because that kind of puts you in a more relaxed state. And then, the second one is dietary patterns. And so, obviously avoiding too much caffeine before bedtime. And, I've actually experimented on this one for myself. I was getting enough sleep quantity wise, but I was still having some issues like up here cognitively. And so I bought this watch to wear during bedtime to track my sleep. And it, you know, sends it to the phone and shows you patterns that are, when you go into different sleep states, your body responds differently. So your heart rate gets either slower or more sporadic. Your breathing changes, your muscles tense up, and you kind of go through different phases. So it kind of looks at your movement, your breathing, your heart rate, and kind of gives you an idea of what stage of sleep you're in. And what I found with myself, and so this is anecdotal, obviously, but if I drank caffeine too close to bedtime, my REM sleep just did not happen. I'd get like maybe 1 or 2, whereas normally like 25% of my sleep would be REM sleep. It would be like 5 to 10%.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things, if you remember, REM sleep is for the cognitive, and that was the issue. So I stopped drinking caffeine and switched over from coffee to decaf, like herbal teas close to bedtime. Now it's good.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a simple fix like that. So sometimes it's just, you don't know unless you know.
Correct.
And then when you know, you do something about it. But it was, you know, caffeine is probably the first place to start for a lot of people. Another one is alcohol.
Absolutely. That was, yes.
Just, again, here we are talking about alcohol. It just doesn't do a lot for you, you know? Like I get it, but it's just holding you back in a lot of ways.
Yep.
And then third would be late night snacking.
Yes.
And so there are studies that basically recommend not eating somewhere in the ballpark of 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. So your last meal should be like 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. Your snacking should be, you know, not super close to bed, because you have to think about if your body is having to spend resources on digesting and moving food around, it's kind of not doing the things it needs to recover and get that rest.
Right.
So you want to put yourself in a position where you haven't like eaten. Now, interestingly, from a weight loss standpoint, I don't know if there is enough of a difference in like metabolic rate. If you eat super late and then, you know, go straight to sleep. I think as long as you're in a calorie deficit, and obviously the deficit might be interfered with if your metabolic rate is shifted because you ate too soon. I don't know the percentages on that.
Yeah.
So I'm hesitant to say that it would completely make or break your weight loss efforts if everything else was dialed in, but it's definitely not doing you any favors.
Correct.
You know, especially outside of weight loss.
Yeah. And I think that's what I've read before too, right? It's not so much the timing of the calories as far as the calories in a day, but you're right. On the flip side is it might disrupt your sleep, which then will affect your cravings and all the things and affect your calories in the long run.
And it'll affect the energy outside of the equation. Correct. So depending on how big your deficit or how fine-tuned your, you know, intake is, sleep disruption could theoretically reduce the energy out so that you're now in a surplus.
Exactly.
So it really kind of depends on how aggressive your deficit is.
Right.
Whether sleep would significantly disrupt your weight loss efforts. But from the hormonal standpoint, it can definitely make it a lot more challenging. And then third would be environment. And we did talk about this a little bit earlier. So use of warm indoor lights. So not getting those blue LEDs or the daylight lights. So if you use the daylight lights in your overhead lights, get you some lamps and put some warm lights in them, right? And use those at nighttime. And if you are like my house, and my wife is like obsessed with the smart lights and the timers on the Google Nest, time it with sunset so that when the sun goes down, the lights change to where they're softer, warmer. And that way it kind of follows that natural, it supports that natural circadian rhythm. Because like you said, that's how our bodies kind of develop to process light through the day, is when that sun goes down, we're supposed to be getting tired. And our brain's production of like melatonin is tied with that. And so we're just disrupting it by keeping all these blue lights on.
For sure.
Use your bed for sleep only. And I was talking to somebody about this today, actually. One of those, you know, when we were thinking about making changes, do something that's a permanent change to your environment first, and that way it makes the other things easier. And so from a weight loss standpoint, an example of that would be just buying smaller plates.
Yeah.
You just do that one time, and now you have smaller plates, and so theoretically your portions will just by nature by default be smaller. Right. And so it's a thing that you do that affects your behavior in a way that you're not consciously having to like do, right? You just can't fit food on the plate. Right. So it's one of the examples I gave today was don't have a TV in your bedroom, because so many people have a TV in the bedroom.
Absolutely.
And if you're spending your time in the bedroom watching TV, you're now associating that room with other activities rather than sleep.
Right.
And so if you don't have a TV, number one, you're not going to be tempted to watch TV in bed and stay up for hours watching TV. But number two, if you're watching TV in a different room and you come in your room, you're more likely to associate that with sleep, and your body will just naturally start to get in preparation for sleep.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So
awesome.
setting up your environment to only sleep in your room.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's so many books on like people who are successful, who have really good habits and stuff like that, and a lot of them will say, I have a spot for this and a spot for this, right? So like when pandemic happened and everybody was working from home, people hated it overall because things were blending together. Right, the dining room table is now my work table, but then it's the kids' table. It's like if you had a place where this is where I sit and eat, this is where I sit and do work, you're not tempted to snack where you work because you have spots.
Right.
And same, like if your cell phone is not plugged into your bedroom, you're not tempted to use it in the middle of the night versus just plugging it in the kitchen. And it's so funny because it's such a small thing, but it pays such big dividends.
Well, one of the most powerful tools that we have in our arsenal for habit forming and behavioral change is environmental design. And trust me, we're going to talk about that.
That's awesome.
But not today.
That's okay.
But yeah, environment design is probably one of the most important things we can do for ourselves. And it all has to do with willpower.
Yes.
And so we'll talk all about that in some of our future episodes.
Yeah.
So, and the other one is keep your bedroom quiet, comfortable, and cool, and then get a good mattress and a good pillow.
Yeah.
Invest in it.
You do have to invest in
How much time of your life do you spend sleeping, and how important is it? Invest in good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an orthopedic surgeon tell me the two things you don't ever want to skimp on are your shoes and your bed, right? Because you're either on your feet
and toilet paper.
That's
like never skimp on toilet. It's a lesson I learned from my friend Chad. I'm going to shout out Chad. He just moved to North Carolina.
That's awesome.
So
yeah, exactly. You're in your bed all the time. Make sure. There's some of them can get super pricey. You don't spend $1 bajillion, but at least just don't go too super cheap on that.
Well, you got to think about it. You should sleep every day.
Yeah.
And something that you do every day, you should probably get good stuff if you're going to use it every day.
Right.
If it's something you're just getting for a one-off thing, I'm not going to spend, crazy amounts of money on fancy paper plates for my daughter's birthday party, right? We'll get something cheap. It's going to get thrown away. It's not a big deal, and she's not going to care. Right. She's 3, right? You sleep every day.
Yeah.
Get good mattress, get good pillows.
For sure.
And so finally, the last one is like your bedtime routine, and it's often called sleep hygiene. So what you do in the hours leading up to bedtime before you go to bed to kind of set yourself up for a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
And the schedule part, like having a consistent bedtime. So, iPhone has it to where you can set up a bedtime and set that schedule. So it'll send you a notification saying, hey, it's that time to start winding down and get towards your bed. And your body it likes routine.
Right.
It really likes routine. And if you go to bed at the same time every day, you're going to find that your body it goes to sleep so much easier.
Yeah.
It's not having to guess. It's like, oh, it's bedtime. Let's go to bed. And you're out.
Yeah.
Right. Or at least you're way more likely to get into that.
Sure.
Right. Avoid daytime naps. And that's a hard one.
That is a hard one.
I tell you, we had field day a couple weeks ago, and it was just outside in the heat, in the sun, all day working events. And then that Saturday came, and I was just beat down still. And so I took a nap, when the kids took a nap, and I had a hard time sleeping that night because I was so, was not as tired as I would have been. So nap times can be disruptive if they're not part of the normal routine. You know,
sure.
I mean, I guess if it's your normal routine to get a daytime nap, then your body will adjust to that over time. But if that's not a normal part of your routine, you need to avoid the daytime naps because it'll disrupt the sleep schedule. And then avoiding the screens and the blue light, we talked about that. Taking a warm bath or shower can help.
Absolutely.
Because when you take a hot bath or a hot shower, a lot of blood rushes to the surface. But then when you climb in your bed, it's cool and you have this temperature fluctuation where the blood goes more internal and it actually puts you in a very relaxed state. So getting a hot shower or a hot bath and then getting right in bed really helps to just physically relax you and put you in a good state to sleep. And then
I like it.
Yeah. And then one more thing to try is just reading a book.
Yes. Not a cell phone book, but actually a paperback book.
Paperback.
Yes.
See, this is another reason that we get the physical copies.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have had, like, a lot of people, if they start reading a book, again, put it into your routine, right? So cell phone says, hey, it's 9:00, go plug me up. I'm shutting off all social media. You get your, bath, you toothbrush, whatever. You get in bed, either journal or read a book. And it's like, if we do this and if you can keep this consistent for like a week or two, your body will figure it out.
I love that you just brought up journaling because that's also something you could do. And I didn't have that on my list, but I'm glad you said it because I've given this recommendation to people before. And this, one of the first things we talked about today is anxieties about tomorrow or ruminating on the things from today.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if you journal, you can start just writing. Take like 5 minutes at the end of the day and just write down whatever it is that you're concerned about in your head from today. Just start writing your thoughts down on the paper because something I've learned is when you have a lot of different things that are all jumbled up in your head, it's like this big ball of anxiety, right?
Yes.
And it's really hard to kind of in your head pick one thing out and try to process it. So it all just stays tangled up like a ball of spaghetti. Well, if you write it down, your brain has to pull out one thought and put it in a coherent sentence while you write. You're not just going to write gibberish,
right?
Unless that's what you're aiming for. But when you write things down and like make a list of all of these things that you're concerned about, it's pulling it out of your head so that you can see it and then process it in a more organized way. And it kind of helps to alleviate some of that, right? And then the same thing is all the things you have to do tomorrow. Make a checklist, make a list of things that you have to do tomorrow, and then put your pen down and say, okay, we'll do that tomorrow. And that immediately pulls it out of your head. And you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's on the paper. So you don't have to worry about forgetting it. It's there.
Absolutely.
So you just do that before bed. Journaling before bed is a really good practice. If you struggle with, not being able to process your thoughts or worrying about what you have to do tomorrow, just write it down, and you just process it differently.
Yeah, no, I've had a lot of patients that have done that, and it has helped them drastically.
Same.
So so if you want to try that, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, that wraps up our first part, right?
So that's all of part 1 plus the bonus episode, which is kind of an in between, because like it's kind of a lot tied in with biological, and then there's a lot of behavioral stuff with it. So I didn't really know where to put it, so we just put it right here. And since, like I said, since months ago, I mentioned that sleep is one of the things that people need to do first. Figured why not? Awesome.
Well, then, and so we're excited about part 2 because part 2, I think, we talked, I think it was a couple episodes about how 95% of people, they lose weight, they can't keep it, right? And they're right back to where, but 5% can. And so part 2 is all about diving into the psychological part of how do we become that 5%.
Yeah. So that's next episode is what do the 5%ers do? And it'll be all the different, what their mindsets are, what their habits usually are, what strategies do they implement, how do they structure their diet, which we've talked about that. I mean, so how we recommended structuring your diet at the end of part 1 is going to tie directly into that because that's pretty much how they do it. And then, all of that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
So, and then after that, we'll just dive into each of those things kind of a little bit more in depth. And it'll end up, being pretty comprehensive towards the end.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Michael.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.